you got to be careful with the language you use, and you got to be careful falsely accusing people of using language that they obviously didn't use. Because, for example, on Twitter, I can read you the exact language that someone was using, and you gotta forgive me because my glasses are a little dirty, so that's why my eyes look blue, but there you go. Let's see here. So, someone had accused Geraldo Rivera of, I want to find, okay. So it began with Jonathan Alter tweeting a nasty tweet. On original tape, you can barely hear Geraldo saying he'll get quote-unquote lynched, picked up on Ducey's mic. And Geraldo already said that first of all, his mic was not cut off, and secondly, if you're gonna accuse someone of using that kind of language, you're using the language yourself. And I mean, remember, my relatives were pogrom survivors and a news team at other times. And you have to remember, it's like if someone said, what is this, the Inquisition? Or what is this, the Holocaust? Or what is this, the pogroms? That would be very insulting. And so to use that language yourself, let alone accuse someone of using it, is an insult to victims and survivors of the kind of events where that language came from. For example, if I said, let's just say for the sake of argument, if Geraldo Rivera really had said that he was going to get quote-unquote lynched, that would be an insult to African Americans whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and granduncles and great-aunts and uncles and aunts and other relatives did actually, for lack of a better term, get lynched. And it's very insulting because, and as far as I know, none of my relatives were victims of lynchings, but had they been, it would have been kind of insulting to me because, like, excuse me, my relatives went through that, and you're using that kind of language. You're throwing around things so lightly, and it's not funny. It's kind of like when people say, oh man, what is this, Inquisition? It's like, really? Because of that kind of stuff. And because of that kind of stuff carrying over into lands where Jews thought they were going to be safe, or similar events occurring in those lands, it wasn't the thing about, oh, what is it, the Inquisition? It wasn't a joke to them. In fact, the 1700s into the 1900s, many of my relatives became a news team because of that, and many of them don't even know that they're Jewish because of that. And sadly, one of my cousins, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be laughing about it, but now that he knows the truth, and I mean, for lack of a better term, he's such an idiot about it. This happened a year ago, but in this case, I am going to call him an idiot because he's Jewish and he says he doesn't like Jews. In that case, he knows the truth, and that's a whole nother discussion. But the point is, people like him are a product of when people throw around the word Inquisition lightly, and when the Inquisition really did happen, and people were like, man, if they're going to do these kinds of things to us and if people are just going to take it lightly and all that, we might as well just convert because we're just so damned afraid. And as I said, you have to think about the victims and the survivors and the descendants who are frankly survivors of those events, even if indirect survivors, because, let's face it, were there, hang on, I'm trying to think of what to say here, and I'm also getting distracted by something else, and that's my apology for that. When I'm talking about a serious subject, I should be paying attention to what I'm saying, but when you are talking about those kinds of events, and then you look at the descendants of those who went through those events, you have to remember that, one, were those people still alive today? They would not like you talking about and taking it lightly. I mean, there are a few exceptions, like the guy who wrote the comic strip Moss, he actually said that when he wrote it and showed it to friends who had survived the Holocaust, they laughed about it, not because they were laughing at the Holocaust or they thought it was funny, but that they were laughing at or with the fact that someone was able to kind of, I don't think it was a comic Moss. It was something else, or it may have been Moss. Whatever it was. Apparently, the guy. I think the story was the guy made a satire, and so the guy had apparently made a satire, and a lot of people were offended by it. But two Holocaust survivors were laughing at it, not because the Holocaust was funny and all that, but because the guy was able to turn it around and put it back on the neo-Nazis and other groups like that. People who will find humor in even satire about those kinds of situations are going to be the exception. So you got to be sensitive to that. And like I said, when you use that kind of language, you got to think about the fact that were our relatives going through those events, some of them before we were born, we may not even be here. For example, if an African American lost his granddad to lynching, but his granddad had been lynched before his dad was born, or before his dad was even conceived, he may not be here. Or, for example, have my great-granddad, because he was a pogrom survivor and because life just caught up with him and he finally decided to commit suicide, had he done that before my great-granddad had he done that before my granddad had been conceived or born, I might not be here. So that's just things that you gotta think about when you're using that kind of language and when you're accusing someone of using that kind of language.